أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهد الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلله فلا هادي له ونشهد أن سيدنا ونبينا ومولانا محمدا عبده ورسوله وصلى الله تبارك وتعالى عليه وعلى آله وصحبه وبارك وسلم تسليما كثيرا أما بعد فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. A couple of weeks ago when we last had the lesson, I made a start on the topic of medicine in Islam, and I mentioned that there are two types of illnesses, two types of diseases or bimaris. The first is what we call the illnesses of the heart, diseases of the heart, such as hatred, such as jealousy, such as overwhelming anger, overwhelming lust. And the cure for the diseases of the heart is the regular remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. As mentioned in a hadith that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has said that everything has a polish. Everything has a polish. In terms of tables, use Mr. Sheen or something, or Mr. whoever to polish the table. Similarly, there is a polish required for the heart, and the polisher of the heart is dhikrullah, is the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So, kasrat dhikr, kasrat tasbih, kasrat salah, recitation of the Holy Quran, as mentioned in the place in the Holy Quran, that when you read the Holy Quran, then it is shifa'ul lima fis sudur, which means that it's a cure for what is in the heart. So these kind of things, zikr, tasbih, tahleel, tawbah, istighfar, kasrat tilawat, kasrat recitation of the Holy Quran, they will inshallah get rid of the maladies and the illnesses of the heart. So that's one kind of sickness, one kind of disease. Then there is another kind of sickness and disease, is got to do more with the physical things, like fever, cold, wounds, ailments, these kind of things. And I mentioned when we last had the lesson a couple of weeks ago, that falling ill or falling sick in particular before one passes away is not considered to be something wrong, is not considered to be something bad. And this was actually the opinion of Hazrat Aisha radhiyallahu anha, that she was of the opinion, or she initially thought, that if somebody goes through stress and difficulty or goes through a very turbulent and a difficult death, she was of the opinion, she thought that that was a sign that this person was a bad person, and that is a sign that this person's hashar, this person's hereafter is also going to be bad and is also going to be difficult and turbulent as well. But then when she saw the difficulty Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam went through at the time of death, and then I explained a couple of weeks ago in detail how Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam fell ill and what was his last few days like on earth, the difficulty, the sweating, the constant collapsing, the constant fainting, then Hazrat Aisha then had retracted opinion, and she then said that in fact if somebody falls ill and goes through a difficult sakaratul maut, is actually going to be mukaffiratun lidhunub. It's going to be a sign for that person's sins being forgiven. Hence the hereafter and the stages thereafter would be easy and will be far more easier than if he didn't go through the sakaratul maut. So what we can understand from the story of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's death is that if somebody does go through a difficult death, we shouldn't think bad of that person. We shouldn't think, he's going to have a very difficult hereafter, his grave is going to be very difficult, his questioning in the grave is going to be difficult. We should not think of like that, but instead think of it to be a blessing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is using his last few moments on earth as a source for his sins to be forgiven, so that in the hereafter he will then be able to go to Jannah without any difficulty. Because as mentioned in many places in the Quran and Hadith, that if you do anything in this world, like you committed a sin, ask for tawbah in this world, because if Allah forgives you, then that is far more better than going into the hereafter, facing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and you are then being questioned for that particular sin. That's why, as you know, that in Islam, when somebody commits, say, zina or adultery, the punishment is that person is stoned to death. But actually the Sahabas, when they committed it, well, during Prophet ﷺ time, the people who committed that crime, they wanted to be stoned to death in this world. Why? Because they knew that the punishment the hereafter will be severe. They won't be able to take it. So they thought that it's far more better that we take the hit in this world, let the stoning to death be our source of, mukaffiratun lizunub. May it be a source for our sins to be forgiven, so that in the hereafter we won't be questioned and nor would we be punished about this particular crime. So that was the second type of illness, which we call illnesses of fever, cold and so on, which is all part and parcel of life, which obviously culminates in the final illness, the sakaratul maut, which obviously takes us to, or makes us leave this world and takes us to our next destination, which is the grave, the barzakh, and then obviously the meeting with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now in today's lesson, I'm just going to mention a few things about illnesses, and in particular two things. Firstly, about two adabs or two etiquettes when it comes to how to treat a sick and an ill person. And thereafterwards, if we have time, I'll mention some things about haram things which kind of affects our body and what we should do in that situation. And the two things which I firstly want to mention, like adab, some etiquettes about illnesses, which can be found in the books of hadith, that number one, the first adab or the first etiquette is we should not force the ill or the sick person to eat something. So when somebody falls ill, when somebody falls bimar or sick, then we should not force that person to eat something. And there's actually a hadith with regards to that, which can be found in Sunan al-Tirmidhi, where Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has said, La tukrihu mardakum ala ta'am wa sharab, which means that do not compel or force your ill person, your sick person, to eat or drink. And then the hadith goes on to say why? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala feeds him, yut'imuhum wa yasqihim, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala quenches him. So if someone's ill or bimar, don't force him to eat. Sometimes it happens with parents that they kind of force you or force their sons or their daughters, no, you have to eat this, you have to eat that. So this is more obviously nasihat and guidelines for the parents, that don't force someone to eat or drink when they are bimar or when they're ill. Now why? The hadith Mubarakah says, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala feeds them and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala quenches them. Now the muhaddiseen have said that this hadith can have two possibilities, two matlabs. Number one, it can mean that spiritually, ruhani taur par Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is feeding them, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is quenching them. Like you probably read the hadith that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam had the habit of a fast called in Arabic wisal, Some wisal, which means that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would continuously fast every single day. So what happened was that the Sahabas, they copied Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and they started fasting every single day. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said to them that no, don't fast. So the Sahabas said to Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, well, you fast and we want to copy, we want to imitate, we want to follow your sunnah. So then Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that I am not like you. Why? Because I am spiritually being fed by Allah, I am spiritually being quenched by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So when I'm fasting, I don't feel the hunger, I don't feel the urge. Whereas you, if you were to fast every single day, you will feel the hunger and it will make you weak, it will make you kamzor. So exactly here, when somebody is ill, the hadith Mubarak is saying that don't feed that person, don't force feed him. Why? Because spiritually he's getting fed. So there's no danger. Now sometimes it happens, parents they say when you're ill, or if you're not going to eat, you're going to feel even more ill, even more weak, even more kind of kamzor. So actually this hadith says that no, they're not going to feel kamzor. Obviously they may be kamzor because of the illness or weak because of the illnesses, but they are not going to be kamzor because of lack of food. Why? Because the hadith quite clearly says that spiritually Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will be keeping them alive, will be feeding them, will be quenching them, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will keep them alive. So that could be one meaning of this hadith. Or another meaning of this hadith could be that do not force your sick people to eat Why? Because Allah is able, or Allah is feeding them or quenching them. So another meaning of Allah feeding them or quenching them could mean that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given them the ability, has given them the qudra, the power, the strength to express sabr and not eat. So in other words, for example, if somebody was healthy, so after a few hours when he gets hungry, it's very difficult for him to control that, to control the hunger, in particular if there's a lot of food around. Let's say at home, if there's a lot of food in the fridge, in the cupboard, and if you're hungry and you haven't eaten for many, many hours, it's difficult for you to control that urge of hunger. But what this hadith is saying, that if somebody is bimar, even though there's so much food at home, in the fridge, in the cupboard, but that bimar person, what Allah does, Allah gives him the strength to obviously express sabr and patience where he is not in need or he doesn't have the urge to eat or drink. And that's why you obviously do tajrubah of this, that when somebody falls ill and you ask them, do you want to eat? They always say no. Even if you give them a nice, beautiful food in front of them, even then they'll say no. Why? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given them the ability, the urge not to or to do sabr and not to have that urge to eat or to drink in that particular ill state. So that's one other which we can derive from that first hadith, that when it comes to illness or sicknesses, the ill person, the marid person, we should not force him to eat. Then he goes on to say, then there's another hadith thereafter, when he tells us or when he explains that if he does want to eat, or if you say, for example, want to give him something, then give him something like, mentioned the hadith here, porridge, or something warm. Because, as mentioned, I'll just read the hadith to you, that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, whenever somebody would fall ill, he would order them, or order his garwale, his family, to make a dish in Arabic called hasa. And hasa is like a mixture of oats and, like if one is one day example, porridge with milk, warming it up. So then Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam mentioned the faida of eating porridge, that when you eat porridge, it gets rid of fuwad al-hazid, which means that, the sadness or the anxiety or the becheni in the heart. By eating porridge, it gets rid of that. And also number two, it also cleans the heart. In other words, that person who's ill and who's finding it difficult, or he's got some pain inside, by eating porridge, it cleans that, and it actually gives that person inner strength to feel better. So that's like another etiquette, another adab which we can derive, that when somebody's ill, if they want to eat something, give them porridge or something which is similar to porridge, but something like made out of milk or something warm. So when they eat that, the ill person, the sick person, Allah gives them again spiritual or more internal or inward kind of strength which they are able to use to then fight away the disease or the illness or the taklif or whatever pain they're facing or feeling. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives them the ability to take that away. So that's like the second etiquette or the second manners which we can read when it comes to, or which we can learn when it comes to ill person. Number one is that we should not force him to eat anything, and number two is that what we give him, if he does want to eat, should be something warm like porridge, something mixed with warm milk. You should give that because that is very beneficial for him inside. So these are two things. Now this then takes me on to the third point which I want to mention. And the third point which I want to mention is, it's mentioned in a hadith here, that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has said that if somebody drinks poison, somebody drank some poison and he kills himself, then the hadith Mubarakah goes on to say that he will be repeating that action in the hereafter. So he will be in the hereafter, meaning in the fire of hell, he'll be drinking poison over and over and over again. And not only that, the hadith also explains that if somebody killed himself in this world, jumped from a high building or from a mountain to his death, then that person will be repeating the action of jumping from a high building, from a high place in the fire of hell. And this continues with every form of suicide. So whether it's hanging yourself, so again, that person will repeat the action of hanging over and over again in the fire of hell. Or just as somebody drank some bleach, so obviously I haven't tried it, but just say for argument's sake, like somebody did drink bleach, probably like burn his throat and his lungs. So again, that person who then killed himself in that way in this world, in the hereafter, he'll be repeating the action over and over again. Now what we can understand from this hadith here is causing damage to ourselves, causing harm to ourselves is something which is haram. So whether we drink poison, bottles of poison, whether it's an overdose, whether it's bleach, whether it's something else, but we cause damage to ourselves. We cause either direct suicide by drinking poison and straight away we're dead, or whether it's kind of a gradual suicide. Both are haram, both are impermissible, and the hadith Mubarakah quite clearly says that that person who killed himself in that way, whether it was instant suicide, instant death, or whether it was gradual suicide, he will be repeating the action over and over again in the fire of hell. Which then takes me on to 2 points which I want to mention, or 2 maslas. One is about smoking, and also simultaneously at the same time we'll be looking at shisha and what do the scholars and the ulama say with regards to that. Now just in general, obviously as everyone knows that smoking, it contains the burning of tobacco, the inhaling of tobacco, the smoking of tobacco, and the same also is used for shisha as well. Even though it may be apple flavor or strawberry flavor, but it's tobacco at the end of the day. What they put into that hole, whatever you call it, it may be apple flavor, it's actually apple flavored tobacco or strawberry flavored tobacco and so on. So it's tobacco at the end of the day, even though it tastes like apple or strawberry or raspberry, whatever, but it's tobacco at the end of the day. So what happens is that in the shisha, like in cigarettes, they burn the tobacco. Obviously for shisha, they tend to use charcoal, I think, to burn it. But obviously they burn the tobacco. And when you look at it, it's mentioned, like researchers have said, that when you smoke or when you take a puff of a cigarette, the smoke which comes out, that is less dangerous, less, say for example, detrimental to a person and to others compared to the smoke which comes out from a shisha or from a hookah. So there's a lot of kind of, obviously if we had more time we could look at it in a bit more detail, could do more research on it, but what I'm trying to say is that the two, smoking and shisha, it entails the burning of tobacco, it entails the inhaling, the smoking of tobacco, and also through passive smoking, other people are also affected as well. Now remember the body parts which we have from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, eyes, nose, ears, legs, feet, kidneys, lungs, it's all what we call amanat from Allah, trust from Allah. Which means that when we leave this world one day, Allah will ask for it back. And the same way when we borrow someone's car or when we borrow someone's phone, it's considered to be reasonable that okay, when you return this car back, you return it in the more or less in the same way which you borrowed it from him. If, say, for example, you took his car and then used it for a day, but when you returned it to him the following day, there's scratches and there's bumps in the car, that person's not going to be too pleased. So similarly, with all the body parts, organs which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us, kidneys, lungs, eyes and so on, when we return it back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it should be returned back more or less in the same condition. Obviously, it will be different in terms of certain things like eyes and so on. Naturally, when we were born, our eyes were very sharp. But obviously, through age, it's going to get weak. But that's Allah's qudrat, that's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted to do that. ears, obviously our hearing going to be a bit weak when we get old. But other kind of things like lungs, kidneys and so on, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants them returned in more or less the same way. So now what happens with smoking, cigarettes or shisha is that it damages the lungs. Because remember, you're breathing in tobacco, and then tobacco gives out nicotine, tar. These are very, very dangerous substances. So what happens is that over time, there's damages to your lungs. And obviously, if you ever go onto the internet, you can see pictures of smoking. That person doesn't smoke, and you'll see on the picture like his lungs are all okay. There's hardly any tar. There's hardly anything wrong in his lungs. Whereas somebody who smokes, then you look at his lungs, it's all dark and it's all black. Why? Because of the years of damage which he has done by smoking and by shisha and all these kind of things. So that's one point to remember. Also on top of that, there are many verses in the Holy Quran where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has said to the Muslims not to throw themselves into destruction. In other words, not to kill yourself. Now even though smoking or shisha or these kind of things, it may not be, as I said, a direct link or directly to suicide or instant suicide, but it is a gradual way of killing yourself. You know, somebody takes one puff of a cigarette, he's not going to die straight away unless Allah wills, or one puff of a shisha, he's not going to die straight away unless Allah wills. But gradually over time, over months, what will he be doing is that he will be damaging his lungs, and that will lead to cancer, that will lead to heart attack, that will lead to cancer, other kind of things, problem with his lungs. It will lead to many problems. So Allah has quite clearly said, don't kill yourself, don't damage yourself. So smoking, shisha, or just cigarettes in general, that leads to gradual damages to our internal organs. It leads to a gradual kind of suicide. And number three, the third reason for its impermissibility is that smoking gives out a very bad odor, a very bad smell. And there are many hadiths where Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has said that if somebody has eaten onions, raw onions, he should not then come to the masjid. Why? Because onions got foul smell. So not only are you giving taklif to the brothers on either side, you're also giving taklif to the angels as well. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was quite stern. He said that فَلَا يَقْرُبَنَّ مَسَاجِدَنَا, that never should he come to our masajid. Our masajid, i.e. the Muslims, because Muslims are clean. So by using the words he should not come to our masajid, Absolutely trying to imply that, you know, he's not doing what a proper sensible Muslim should do. And that is that when he eats onions, nothing wrong with eating onions, but making sure that he brushes his teeth, cleans his mouth, then he comes to the masjid. So those who smoke, those who take shisha, in particular with cigarettes, it's got a very foul smell. And you see sometimes people, they're having a cigarette outside, and 2 minutes before namaz, and then namaz time starts, they take out the cigarette and they come, and you can still smell the cigarette on their fingers, on their hands, on their clothes and so on. So because of these three reasons, cigarettes and also shisha as well would be definitely in the makruh tahrimi. Makruh tahrimi, severely disliked tahrimi, to take that. Now you may be thinking, you know, why isn't there rule about haram and so on? The reason why we won't call it haram is because you need to realize that these things, cigarettes and shisha, they weren't around during Prophet ﷺ's time. They weren't around during the companions' time, or during the tabi'ins, the predecessors' time, and during their predecessors, i.e. tabi tabi'ins' time. So because these things weren't around during the Khairul Qurun period, it is always a grey area in Islam. What I mean grey area is that some scholars will say, okay, it's haram. Some will say it's makruh. So you can't really get a total convincing or a certain kind of answer, because it wasn't during Prophet ﷺ's time. So this issue will always be up to debate. That's why many people, they ask this question, or Mufti Saab or Imam Saab, what is the ruling about smoking? Because some scholars say it's haram, some say this. So I give them the same answer. The reason why you get difference of opinions is because it wasn't during Prophet ﷺ's time. So it's always going to be a grey area. And even 20 years later, it will always still be a grey area. That's why you'll always have different opinions whether it is allowed, whether it is permissible or not. But what we can definitely say, because of the modern day research on the issue of tobacco and the damage it causes to the lungs, that it's definitely in the makruh tahrimi, i.e. severely disliked category. And as all of you knows that when you constantly do a severely disliked action, then it does eventually become unlawful and haram. Like with small sins, that if somebody continuously and constantly does small sins, it then becomes a big sin and a kabira guna. So exactly here with regards to makruh tahrimi, severely disliked actions, that if it's continuously done without tawbah, or to the extent that you're doing it, not thinking it to be something wrong or bad. That's another problem as well, that sometimes we make a mistake, we do something small, like a small sin, but we then think of it that, it doesn't matter, it's only small. So you'll get some people that they'll smoke, they'll take the shisha thinking that it's just harmless. And in particular with shisha, especially with the youngsters, it's considered very harmless. People think, it's far more better than taking drugs. Sometimes I speak to youngsters, they say, well, Mufti Sahib, it's more better than taking drugs. Now, how can you compare the two together when both are harmful to oneself? How can you say it's more better than, it's like, say, somebody comparing stealing and zina together. It says, well, I'm stealing, but it's more better than zina. So you can't compare the two and make stealing lawful, or somebody's committing zina and he's saying, well, I'm not stealing, am I? So it's more better than stealing, and legalize adultery in that way. So exactly here as well, that some youngsters say, well, it should be okay because it's better than taking drugs. So it's nothing about comparing two haram things together or two disliked things together. So what I'm trying to say is that the two things, it's more or less makruh tahrimi. It should be something which is best to refrain from. And obviously, there may be youngsters here who maybe, take shisha, or who smoke shisha. And one of the reasons why they smoke it is because they've got nothing to do. That's what it is with the problem with the youth nowadays, is that they're not doing anything. So they think, they might as well just go to this shisha lounge here and just smoke for 1.5 hours, and then we'll come and pray Isha and then we'll go home. So that's the problem. They got nothing to do. So it's very important for the youngsters, just keep yourself motivated, active, whether within the masjid or any other kind of programs which go on locally. Keep yourself busy, keep yourself active, do exercise even. Even sometimes when you do exercise, it kind of releases some energy. So in that particular way, do something where you don't actually spend your time doing something which is disliked and obviously wasting time, and also at the same time damaging your body. And as mentioned, the hadith, I'll finish off by the hadith I mentioned, that is leading to a person committing a gradual and a slow way of suicide. May Allah gives the tawfiq to what's been said. Wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alamin.